This episode is brought to you by Jinx, the superfood-powered dog kibble everyone's been talking about. See the results for yourself and try their 1-month transformation. Within the first few weeks, you'll see how Jinx can help with your dog's energy, mood, and even digestion. And it's all thanks to the high-quality ingredients they use, like organic chicken, Atlantic salmon, and grass-fed beef. Try the 1-month transformation today. Find Jinx in your local Walmart.
Join me, 48 Hours correspondent Erin Moriarty, on my podcast, My Life of Crime, as I take on true crime investigations like no other. This season, I'm looking into the labyrinth of crime and secrets within families. I'm cutting straight to the evidence and talking to the people directly involved, including investigators and the families of victims. Listen to My Life of Crime with Erin Moriarty wherever you get your podcasts.
A note to listeners, the following podcast contains content that may not be suitable for all audiences. Discretion is advised.
But I was told, and all of us were well aware of the sensitivity of working this case, as well as the danger to it. When we got to this area, the dog showed an obvious and an immediate change of behavior and alerted exactly where this fire was.
And I really don't think that any of them thought that this would go as long as it has. But I think they left Colt out there thinking that nobody would ever find him. Alex drove on down there himself. And when he arrived at people pointing guns at him when he got there.
You are listening to Partners in True Crime. We are your hosts, Rob and Cindy Dorfman.
Hello, everybody. We're really excited about all of the support that we've gotten in the past week, and the discussion board is amazing. We want you guys to keep talking, and it's really exciting for us. But I did notice that one of the subjects that kept coming up is about the canines, and people kept asking, were canines ever used in this case? And if they were, what had happened? So in our experience, we've used a lot of canines, and they've always been right on.
Over the past years as true crime producers, we have worked with a lot of amazing people at the top of their field. And Trace Sargent is one of those people. She's considered one of the best canine handlers for human remains out there.
And we've been lucky enough to work with her on a few cases. She is amazing, and so are her dogs. A year after Molly and Colt went missing, Molly's family hired a private investigator, Phil Klein, and he brought in Trace to run her dogs near the burn pit. And what they found was incredible.
Let's call Trace.
Hello?
Hi, Tracy. It's Cindy and Rob. How are you?
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
Yeah, so we're really happy for you to be on the show and to do this. I mean, just to start off, just tell us a little bit about your background. We know your background just for the audience's perspective. But we would just want to get your perspective because you were there during a crucial moment. Obviously, anything you know about the case would be great too. Everybody's been sharing tidbits of information that they have gleaned over the time of working on this case. And, we're talking to all law enforcement. We're talking to witnesses. We're talking to everybody. As you know, that's how we do things.
Sure. Well, fantastic. Okay, so you guys need my specific input from the canine side of things,
Sure.
correct?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, great. Okay, well, fantastic. So the first question, how much do you want my background?
Just give us a brief summary of like how you got into this and, how you became a federal agent to do this and federally authorized to cadaver dogs, and tell us a little bit about your dogs.
I have been involved in missing person cases for over 28 years, specializing in missing persons through the use of canine resources. And in fact, I have dogs that are trained to find people both dead and alive. I am a retired law enforcement officer, but I've been doing these type of searches on a volunteer basis for numerous agencies, both at the local, regional, and national, and even international levels. So my involvement in this particular case, I was contacted by the private investigator that was leading the investigation for a member of Molly's family spearheading this, and reached out to Mr. Klein to investigate this from the private part of it, as well as in cooperation and in collaboration with law enforcement officials. So as they obtained tips and leads, he contacted me, and there were some areas that they were interested in searching. And those areas of interest was tied directly into where Molly and Colt were last seen, which was in the car with Pond. And the information that they had received that the car was found at this location and they had that exact location. We did go to those areas as well as some other areas of interest in that vicinity. Getting into the specifics of what we did, and we did several days of searches. One of the things that was highlighted, and we did not know this afterwards, but I was told, and all of us were well aware of the sensitivity of working this case, as well as the danger to it. They did tell me that there's a possibility people might be watching us, so we did have protection watching me and my dog Chance, just as a safety measure. We were not, fortunately, approached or confronted by anybody while we were there in a threatening manner. We did have a few people that were giving us some tips and leads as we were there. Specifically, one farmer talked about several things that led us to a specific area, and we had some interesting results there. And what he conveyed to us was several things. One, there was a couple that was out in the area, I believe, riding four-wheelers or ATVs, something like that, and they reported something smelling bad. They didn't know exactly what it was, and they didn't provide any more details as far as this farmer was concerned, but it was on his property. So he investigated it, and when he went into that area, there was a fire there, and it was a very, very hot fire. So he said that law enforcement came out there and investigated it, did a number of other things, and that really piqued our curiosity, and we asked him, could you take us to this area where this fire was? Please note that we had already been searching for hours at this time. No results, no change of behavior indications by the search dog. When we got to this area, the dog showed an obvious and an immediate change of behavior and alerted exactly where this fire was. So just to paint a picture to the listeners, this is a large rural agricultural area. No barns or structures or any areas that you can see other than woods, fields. And where the fire was actually there was what they called a dried out or dried creek bed, which was probably 15 feet wide or so. And if I had to estimate, this was probably a couple hundred yards from where the car was found, as far as the crow flies. And mind you, there were thick patches of wood, so if someone wanted to walk from the car to this location, it may be, somewhat longer. But as far as the crow flies, it was probably a couple hundred yards or so. So when we got to this area, the dog, and mind you, we had been searching already for hours and hours. And I know Mr. Klein and the other investigators were really interested in some areas that we searched previously, and they really felt a high degree of confidence that the dog would, show us something or indicate to something in those areas, and he did not. So we were able to clear those areas pretty quickly. The farmer led us to this particular area of interest. So when we got to there, they had already seen Chance working for hours at this time, and they even noticed a change in his behavior. His change of behavior was immediate. It was very obvious. It was very noticeable. And he immediately alerted to this dry creek bed right in the middle of it. So as I'm standing there trying to figure out, all right, first of all, why would there be a fire here? Was it lightning? Was there a campfire? Was there even a possibility of some kind of machinery? Trying to justify, other than some kind of criminal justification, why a fire would be set here. And there really wasn't any. It was in the middle of this dry creek bed. It made no sense why a fire would be placed there. That was the exact same area where this couple had reported some type of foul odor. So it was just a very suspicious circumstances. But what really was interesting as far as from the dog's behavior, we had actually searched what we call upstream from this dry creek bed for hours, as well as the surrounding areas. The dog did nothing. Everything at where this fire happened and everything downstream in this dry creek bed, the dog alerted and had obvious change of behavior. That was the only area that he showed any changes, any alerts or indications throughout the days that we had searched during our visit at that time. So it was just a very, very interesting development and something that we really didn't expect. But we've learned over the years that go by any tips or leads, even if they sound strange or unusual, maybe if they don't make any sense, later on we find out it makes perfect sense. When we dug in that area, there were obvious ashes. And when I say ashes, we're not talking small amount. There would have to be a large amount of debris or something to be burned here. And we did ask the farmer, did you burn any debris here? Because sometimes farmers clear fields and they pile it up and burn it and things like that. He said no. He said, this was not me. We don't know why this fire was set, and it was obviously deliberately set. It wasn't a natural occurrence. And then we went further downstream, and again, this was a dry creek bed. There's no water, and there was a collection of some logs and debris as when this area was wet or flooded, debris and logs would, gather in certain points. The dog alerted in those areas as well, so we checked those extensively. We didn't find any tangible evidence that we could hold or identify, but it really made no sense why here, other than some type of connection that we felt and theorized that it had to be tied into Molly and Colt. And even some theories of did maybe one of them climb a tree and fall here, and there was blood. So we tried to think of all these reasons why the dog is responding here. I know Philip was still looking into all of that. But as far as all the areas that we checked in those days of searching with Canine Chance, that was the only place he showed any changes, any alerts at all. And then you tie it back into these other tips and leads, a strange smell, the fire itself, and in close proximity to where the car was found. Just a lot of coincidences there. And I got to say, as an investigator, and I would speak for other investigators as well, coincidences really don't happen in an investigation. There's just too many. So you've got to figure out how does that tie in, because there's a difference between coincidence and fact. And most often these coincidences are fact. It's just a really, really interesting development in that. I did find out later on through Mr. Klein that they got tips and leads that we were in fact being watched. He didn't give me a lot of details other than that the people that were watching us were quite dangerous. So that's another coincidence there. Why would anybody be interested in us searching there unless they didn't want us to search there? Just a really, really interesting case. I know later on, let me back up. So as far as what we did with the dog that day, we cleared a massive amount of area. And then the dog alerted in that one particular area of interest. Anytime we work on these cases, whether it's a private investigator or law enforcement or even the family, and the only thing we can promise when we use these canine resources is that we don't know what's going to happen today. We don't know if we're going to find anything or if nothing is found. But the one thing I can promise and will promise every time we use these canine resources is that we will know more at the end of the day than we did at the beginning of the day. And that's what happened here. We did find out more information. We did find some interesting developments, and we knew more at the end of the day than we did at the beginning of the day. Now, how does all that tie in to Molly and Colt? I know the investigators are still looking into all of that. And it's been my experience. Sometimes this takes months or even years. But once it's found out, and I always ask for the investigators, once these cases are concluded and solved, is to let me know, what they find out, because it's always interesting to see how the dog's responses actually do tie in to what happened once we find out, more details. So that's what happened on that particular sense.
Based on your experience, you've been doing this for 20 plus years, there are remains there.
So the question we get oftentimes is that Chance, being what we call a human remains detection dog, most people know them as cadaver dog. What does that mean when these dogs have a change of behavior, or what most people say, alert or indication? What they're telling us is that there is human remains scent in that area. That's all they're telling us. It's very similar. In fact, it's exactly like a drug dog or a bomb dog. When they alert to a car or to a dumpster or something like that, they cannot tell us what's in there. They can simply say, hey, the scent I've been imprinted on, I'm smelling this scent coming from this location. So think of it, a lot of people are able to interpret and imagine and picture these cadaver dogs like drug dogs a little bit better when, again, a drug dog alerts on a car. The handler cannot say there's a pound of marijuana or there's 5 pounds of cocaine or whatever in there. So for me, as a canine handler of an HRD dog, I cannot tell you what is causing this dog to alert in this area other than human remains scent. So we, meaning the human part of this equation and the human part of the investigation, that's the investigators with law enforcement, other investigators, is to go in and say, why did this dog alert here? And can we find tangible evidence to tie it directly to what we're investigating? Or does it have anything to do with this investigation or nothing? A good example is that we've worked some cases where the dog alerts to, let's say, a garbage can in the bathroom, and there's some used Fenneman products in there. The dog alerts and we've actually had this happen in several murder cases. The dog alerts to this bathroom garbage can, we reward it, and then it goes into the couch where the person was shot and killed. It's an actual case we worked. She was asleep on the couch and she was shot in the head. The dog acted exactly the same way when it alerted to the couch. So we could say in the bathroom has nothing to do with our case, but on the couch it has everything to do with our case. So that's the same thing here, is that the investigators search the areas to determine if there's any tangible evidence as well as material witnesses or something to tie that particular area of where the dog responded to the criminal case that they are looking at. From a dog handler's perspective, as I would say to any investigator or courts, is that the dog is trained to detect human remains scent, and that's what he did in that area. And that's all I can report, unless we find tangible evidence to say otherwise.
Okay, just for our reference, how much does the blood, how much blood needs to be there for the dog to pick up, volume-wise?
It has a lot to do with the environmental condition. Let's say if there was blood there and then shortly afterwards there was a flood and it washed everything away, or if it was very, very dry conditions and the blood is a fluid and it's been absorbed very quickly by the heat and the temperatures. So it does have some variabilities there. I would say from the sensitivity of the dogs, we have seen that it doesn't take a lot of blood. I could not tell you an exact amount as far as, fluid amount, but the dogs themselves, they're quite sensitive. And we do train, and I specifically train my dogs to what we call low thresholds. And the reason for that is because we do quite a bit of historical projects, meaning battlefields. In fact, we've done several of the last few months where individuals have been dead, 200 or 300 years. So we train the dog for very, very low threshold so they can pick up very minute scent of human remains. So a part of it is the environmental condition, and part of it is the level of threshold that the dogs are trained.
Can I stop you for a second? I have a quick follow-up question here. Does the dog's reaction, like if the dog is hitting vigorously, does that equate with like a volume of blood or remains? Because you were telling us that the dog hit pretty vigorously in that area. Mm-hmm. And I don't know whether or not if it's a little bit of blood, they just react a little bit, or if it's a lot of blood, if they get in a frenzy. What was the dog's reaction based upon the dog's reaction? How much do you think was there?
So that's a really good question. I would say, and it's a simplistic answer, the higher the scent, the more obvious the dogs are going to respond to it. So in this case, the scent itself and the reaction to and how aggressively and quickly the dog responded to this area, there was a good bit of scent for him to detect. The simple part of that would be, yes, if it's more scent, the dogs are going to be able to pick up that much more quickly and be a lot more animated, what we call change of behavior to that. Whereas again, if it's lower scent and we see that they're picking something up, but they can't quite figure out where it is because it's very small and it's really hard for them to detect, we've seen that change as well. I do want to note that scent itself is a living organism. So my job as a canine handler, the responsibility is to place the dog in an environment, if there is in fact scent, to put him in that environment where he can detect it. For example, early mornings, dusk and dawn are really ideal what we call scent conditions. An environment where the scent and the conditions of the scent are going to be a lot more optimum and a lot more favorable for the dogs to detect. If we're searching at high noon until 5 or 6 o'clock at night, the scent itself is, for lack of better words, it's going to be dead. It's going to be undetectable. Not to say that the dog is no good and the training that it's received is not good. It's just that if the scent isn't there, the dogs aren't going to pick it up. So it's my responsibility to make sure that, one, I place the dog in an environment at the time of day, even at the time of year, that's more favorable for the scent to be living, for the dog to be able to detect that. We were fortunate that the day that we did search, it did have some cloud cover. It wasn't high noon. It wasn't real hot conditions. So that in itself allowed the scent conditions, the living organism of this scent, to be favorable for the dog to detect itself.
So you basically got the best circumstances for your dog to find that scent.
Yes, we do.
Trace, this happened in 2013. How long after they went missing did you guys go out there with Chance?
I want to say, and I've got to look back on my notes, I want to say it was about a year later, maybe 9 months, 12 months, something like that. So it wasn't immediate when we went out there. So if you're looking at 12 months later, if there is in fact a body out there, it's going to be fully skeletalized. So the dogs are trained to find the full spectrum of human remains, from a full-size body, the skin and the remains itself, as well as the skeletal part, and then any fluids themselves too. And that was another thing that we thought about for this particular area. And this is, I think, important to share with the listeners as well. And we've had this happen several times, and it's been confirmed. There's been murder cases we've worked where the person was killed, and then later on, the person's body was removed. Whether, hours later, days later, weeks later, it varied. But what has happened is that when the body dies, it decomposes immediately. It may not be visually, we can't visually see it, but as soon as the body dies, the decomp process starts immediately. Well, we as human beings are made up primarily of fluid. So those fluids are going to be absorbed into the ground, and it's what we call residual scent. So even after somebody's body has been removed from the area, and we've had this happen in several cases, the dogs still detect what we call residual scent. So that's a possibility as well. So it's not about, and that's one thing that's helped me over the years as a canine handler. When I got out of the mindset that I'm looking for a body or a person, instead of looking at it, I'm looking for scent, my success rate and the dog's success rate actually increased.
How often has evidence that your dog discovered has been the result of someone being caught and convicted?
Oh, goodness. Rob, I could not give you a number on that. I've been doing this so many years, and I've probably worked, I would say, close to 15, maybe 1,800 cases over the years, and that's both dead and alive cases, good guys and bad guys. I really couldn't give you a number.
Can you give me a percentage-wise, like 20%, 30% of the times the dog hit on something that resulted in evidence that contributed to the conviction? Not that it was the sole piece of evidence, but that was part of the overall case against a killer.
Well, I would say this, two things on that. In all the years that I've been doing this, we've never missed anything. Meaning, if there was a body there, if there were human remains there, if there was even a live person there, we found them. Secondly, the dogs themselves really are a multi-layered thing. What I mean by that is that they are a resource and a tool for us, but they are also what we call part of the investigative team. And for me, not only as a law enforcement officer taking the canine part of that equation out, but also as a canine handler, I would say, and to answer your question, it really does take teamwork to solve these cases. And the dogs are part of the team effort with one common goal, with multiple layers. And that is, the common goal is to find that person and where they are so we can help these families through this terrible, terrible tragedy and this very, very darkness that they're in. And then ultimately holding those individuals accountable.
Well, I would like to surmise that because you've done this for so long and you're the go-to person with your dog who we've met and who we've worked with, that you've probably made a significant impact on a lot of these cases.
Absolutely.
Well, I appreciate that. I do. And for me, the families and the investigators motivate me to continue doing this. And my biggest, let me say my biggest hope every case that I work, and especially in these homicide cases, I have seen families torn apart, destroyed. That person that has been killed is not the only person impacted or even dies from that event. And I've also seen firsthand, so sad to say this, but it's true, there's a lot worse things out there than death. And I've seen what these things do to families. So my biggest hope, not only in doing this, but in my life, is that as I help these families and these officials, because it affects them as well, is that there is no such thing as closure in these situations. The word closure is not an accurate statement. When we find these bodies, and even when the person is prosecuted and sent to jail for life, there's no closure to this family. It's a nightmare that continues for the rest of their lives.
We agree. There's no closure here.
No.
Paula's not doing this for closure. She's doing this to find the people responsible for this.
Yeah.
And hold them accountable. And hold them accountable. Because right now they're walking around free and all the evidence is pointing in a particular direction. I want to talk about a little bit about when you were there. You talked about Phil saying that you were being watched by dangerous people. Because we were there in that same area probably a few years after you in that same pit. And
they were watching us and I had a laser on my head.
Mm-hmm.
And my director of photography said, "There's a laser on your head." And I looked up and I was like, oh my God, they're watching us in the tree. I mean, I could see them. They weren't that far away.
And so my question to you is, how many times have you had to work under those conditions where you potentially could get hurt, your dog could get hurt, or is that something rare?
Well, I actually used to do a lot of fugitive searches, live searches, people that, running away from police for a variety of reasons, from rapists, murderers, killers, cop killers, thieves, all the above. So yes, in every one of those, I could have gotten hurt or killed. The dog could have gotten hurt or killed. The officers with me could have gotten hurt or killed. So I've actually done that quite a bit. The Molly and Colt case was a little unusual in that even in homicide cases, these bad guys don't want the body to be found. They don't want these questions answered. There have been some cases where there's been an element of danger, that there's been a safety issue. I would say, and I think I speak for everyone involved in this case, and certainly any investigators and law enforcement and canine handlers involved in any of these cases, that's not going to stop it. It doesn't bother me. I'm alert. I'm aware of it, but I'm really at peace with it. If I die doing this, I'm okay with it because I'm dying for a purpose. That's the purpose in my life and the purpose in helping these families and officials. So it's not something that stops me. It makes me aware. And I would just say to anybody out there that we're not going to give up. And I tell the families and officials that on every search. And I can see it in their eyes when we come out of the woods and did you find them? It's like, no, I'm sorry. I wished we did. And it's just heartbreaking. You literally see and feel their heart breaking right in front of you. And I tell them, but please note, this does not mean we stop here. It's just the beginning. However long it takes, whether it takes another month, another year, another 10 years, another 20 years, we're going to keep looking. And I would say that about this case and any other cases that we're involved with.
So the actual property, the NIP property, has never been searched the way it needs to be searched. This particular part that you searched was adjacent to the NIP property, probably about maybe 200 yards from the property line. My question to you is, there's been an effort to get a search warrant to search that property. Phil has told us about it. We've had local law enforcement saying it. One warrant has been officially rejected by a judge for a ridiculous reason. Should a warrant search warrant be issued for that property, and it's opened up to law enforcement, would you participate in that search as well?
I told Philip and the investigators, if y'all get the okay, I will pay my own plane ticket to come out there and search. Absolutely.
This episode is brought to you by Jinx, the superfood-powered dog kibble everyone's been talking about. See the results for yourself and try their 1-month transformation. Within the first few weeks, you'll see how Jinx can help with your dog's energy, mood, and even digestion. And it's all thanks to the high-quality ingredients they use, like organic chicken, Atlantic salmon, and grass-fed beef. Try the 1-month transformation today. Find Jinx in your local Walmart.
Inspired by the life of the savvy and ambitious Colombian businesswoman Griselda Blanco comes a new Netflix original limited series. Griselda tells the story of a devoted mother who, with her lethal blend of charm and relentless savagery, creates one of the most powerful cartels in history. Witness Sofia Vergara's captivating transformation into the godmother of the underworld. Griselda, streaming January 25th, only on Netflix.
I would be involved and am involved 1,000%. So all I need is the phone call and the okay, and me and my dog will be on the first plane out and check that area, and we will check every square inch of it and literally leave no stone unturned.
The other thing I want to ask you is, as an investigator, based upon the circumstances and the witness, I don't know how much you know about this case now. Do you have any opinions about what you think happened?
Well, let me add to the previous statement about what the dog did and this possible site of where, maybe 2 bodies had been burned up and whatnot. I will say this, and I say this with a high degree of observation. People, and I say this with respect, people, especially men, don't do anything for nothing. They are very action-oriented. They're very goal-oriented, and they don't exert that amount of time and energy and effort for nothing. So why there? Why did someone, presumably a male or males, go through all of this trouble in this particular area? Why are individuals so concerned about other people being in that area? Why are people not allowing other people to search their property? So to me, it's too many coincidences. And again, people, especially men, do not do something for nothing. So I would say that it's a very compelling area. It's a very interesting area. And I think I would not be surprised that ultimately it will be tied to this case somehow, some way. I will say that much. It's a cliche, but there's some truth to it. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to hide. Guilty people, or I should say innocent people, have nothing to hide, and generally very open and willing for us to search. And we've even had suspects, that were, persons of interest. We searched their property and they would say, listen, come on my property. I want to be taken off the list. If this is what it takes, then so be it. We go on there, we search. It's like, what we're looking for is not here. And we take them off the list. So I would say to anyone that involved in this case that does not want their property searched, I would say if you want to get your name off the list or, a person of interest, we would be more than happy to come out there, search it, and then we move on from there.
We agree.
100%.
I think it's a perfect place to end this. It's a call to action to the potential suspects, anybody who the law enforcement feel that is involved in this. And if the Nip family is listening, if you want your name off the list, if you don't want Paula continuing to make this case as big as possible, just let them on the property. Let's clear this out. Check them off the list. So thank you for saying that. And I think that's an important thing to say. And we appreciate the time that you've spent with us. And
thank you so much, Trace.
And keep on doing the work you're doing. And I'm sure we'll work together again as we have, because you're amazing and your dogs are amazing. And thank you very much.
Well, and I would say and echo that. Thank you, as well as everyone involved in this case, the importance and taking the time and energy and the passion to tell this story, because it needs to be told and needs to be continued to be told until, again, people are held accountable and we find the answers that these families and officials so rightfully deserve, and ultimately give them the peace that they deserve as well. So thank you.
Right back at you.
Thanks, Trace.
This case is a myriad of theories and rabbit holes, but one thing has stayed the same.
The tips and theories that came out in the first week keep coming back, and they always say that your truth lies in the beginning. We have asked Molly's cousin Paula to share her theory on what she believes happened, because Paula has been there from day one.
Hello.
Hey,
we're back. We're back with Paula.
We're back.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, Paula. So I think it's important for everyone to know what your theory is to clarify some things. So why don't you tell us what your theory is about what happened to Molly and Colt?
Okay. Well, I think, some of the tips and the so-called rumors that we heard in the very beginning are where we need to go back to. I believe that after the police chase and Molly and Colt got out of the car, that they were out in the woods all night long trying to get help because they didn't know where they were. And the 4 people that had been out in those early morning hours looking for them, I think that after those 4 left Con's house after asking where they were, I believe Con and Colby Barrick, his uncle, went back out there. I also believe, based on new information that we got last year, that also Colby Barrick's cousin, Nick, also went out there with them. I believe that Colt and Con got into an argument, and up to that point, I did not know, up until last year when we got the new information, I was not aware, or I had my speculations who might have killed Colt. But now, based off of what this person has said, who claims to have firsthand knowledge of everything that went on out there, I believe Colt was left there. And I really don't think that any of them thought that this would go as long as it has. But I think they left Colt out there thinking that nobody would ever find him. And we would have, had we had better idea of where to look. I think we would have eventually found him. I believe Molly was brought back to the Nip property because they didn't know what to do with her at that moment. I believe Molly was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And then the tip came in July the 10th that Molly was tied to a tree. I've always believed that tip was true. When the Carter County deputies went to Long Hollow Road on July the 10th on that information, and the undersheriff and the chief of police of Wilson were blocking off Long Hollow Road and said, Joe's down there checking it out. Everything's fine. Con's just down there babysitting his nephew. I believe at that moment that Molly, I want to think that Molly could have been saved at that moment, that she was still alive. But irregardless, if she was alive or deceased at that moment, we could have found her then. I don't think early on, I just still think that everybody thought it was a runaway and all the rumors that were going around. So I don't blame Carter County for not going forward and going on down there and checking this out for themselves.
So that was Felix Hernandez who was the police chief from Carter County, or was that Wilson? Wait, can you just tell me who was down there?
Okay, the chief of police of Wilson was Felix Hernandez, and one of the ones at the end of Long Hollow Road, or at the beginning entrance into Long Hollow Road, and then also Harvey Stewart, who was the undersheriff at the time. So I believe that Molly, going back to the information that we received last year, kind of confirms what my theory has been for years, and that Molly was tied to a tree, and that a lot had happened to her over the course of that 2 days. Could have been longer. She may have still been alive at that moment, like I said, and she could have been saved. But even had she already passed at that moment, then we could have at least found her.
So do you think she was on the Nip property all that time?
Mm-hmm, I do. I believe she was. So if you go down Long Hollow Road toward the end of Long Hollow Road, and Long Hollow Road comes off of Oswald Road going south. And when you get to the end of Long Hollow Road, and it kind of curves to the right. So when you curve off to the right, there's a gate there. And also in front of that gate, there was a slab, a concrete slab. There was a travel trailer sitting there. That travel trailer was being occupied by a man who, I don't know exactly what his reasoning for living out there was, other than what I've been told, and that was that he broke horses for John Nip, Con's grandfather, and, did some things around there, around the property and such. So there's that travel trailer sitting there. So if you make that right, going back to the west, there's that gate. After you enter that gate, if you turn, immediate to the right is a hill. You drive up that hill, and on the top of that hill, there is a shop building up at the top of that hill. There was a lot of cars, abandoned cars, up on the top of that hill. And according to what the person who gave us the tip last year, Molly was tied to a tree on the northeast side of that shop building. And I believe that that's where Molly was eventually passed, is right there. So on July, I believe it was the 26th, we conducted a search. It was organized by family. So there was probably approximately 50 people who showed up for the search. And maps were given out, and everybody went in different directions. And we basically showed them an area where they could not cross over to, and that would be the NIF land. But the other properties that we gave people to search, that had all been approved by the landowner. We had been out there, I don't know the time frame, how long we had already been out there, and we got a phone call from some other people in the search party telling us that we need to get down Long Hollow Road ASAP. So we drove down Long Hollow Road on our four-wheelers, and we had people out there on horseback. And when we got to the end of Long Hollow Road, we knew by entering that first gate that we were entering into where the travel trailer was that we assumed was the NIP property. So everybody kind of just stopped right there. And we couldn't see what was going on behind that travel trailer. We went on around, I went on around the travel trailer, then waved them on, because once you got around the travel trailer, you saw all the people. There was a lot of people back there, including some in law enforcement from the Wilson Police Department, who were out there just making sure they were on site out there, not searching, but just making sure that everybody stayed safe. The reason, from my understanding, that everybody converged on this area was because there was a backpack and a shoe found in the ravine just below the hill where that shop building is. Now, if a person in the middle of the night who does not know the area ended up down in that location, they would have no clue where they were. Because number one, going down Long Hollow Road in the middle of the night it's just pitch black out there.
Can I stop you for a second real quick? Because the backpack you're referring to and the clothes, weren't they declared someone else's?
They were. Molly's stepfather, he went down to look at them, and he said they did not belong to Molly. Now, and I'm not certain about this, I'm speculating, but I think it was Colt's sister, Monique, who said she did not believe that the backpack or the shoe belonged to Colt. But at a later time, it was a Nike backpack. At a later time, I talked to Katie Savage, who was Colt's baby's mom, and she had given Colt a backpack, a Nike backpack. But at the time, I don't think Katie was down there. But irregardless, it was ruled that it did not belong to either of them.
But it could have been. It could have been. What you're saying is that it might have been Colt's.
Well, it could have been, yeah. We don't know. Colt had his lifestyle and hadn't seen his family in a while, from my understanding, and because of his way of life and what he had been doing. So they just were not aware that it was his.
Yeah.
I don't believe it was ever collected.
Was anything in it?
I don't know, because they roped off. I don't believe so, but they did. The police did rope off the area, and they also roped off the area going up the hill and would not let us cross to go up the hill to check things out up the hill.
One question real quick. What law enforcement agency found the backpack? Was it Love County? Was it Wilson? It was Wilson. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Did they
See, we didn't call Love County out there, but the NIPS did.
Understood. But has anyone ever seen that backpack?
Mm-mm.
There's no photograph of it? Was it a chain of evidence that it was administered to? Was there a photograph taken of it? I mean, because there's one real quick way to find out if it was Colt's or not, is that you take a photograph of it or you show it to Colt's... Katie, and to find out if that's the right one. That would be the logical thing.
Well, I got access to the Wilson... I did a FOIA request requesting Wilson PD's records, which we obtained how long ago? 3-4 months ago. I have not seen that photo. I have seen no photographs of that backpack in the files that we received, and it would have been Wilson PD that took the pictures.
Well, it should still be in an evidence locker somewhere. I mean, it's not someone's. It was part of a search.
Left and not even collected, to be quite honest with you.
Interesting.
If it's determined that it was not Colt or Molly's.
Well, how can they determine that just from someone saying no? They don't know.
Well, I know. And that's...
I mean, that could be a piece of evidence. It could have had something in it. It could have had money in it. It could have had drugs in it. It could have had, you don't know what was in that backpack. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I'm sure they looked in it, but I've never seen a report on it. I could go back and look in their files and see if there was a report. It would have been, I believe, July the 26th. It was the following week after the car was found that this search was conducted.
All right. Well, take us back to where I interrupted you before. Take us back. Right. So they found the backpack. They determined Alex went up there and said it wasn't Molly's. We're not sure if it wasn't Colt's at this point, but What else besides them all converging on that area around the backpack? What happened after that?
Colby Barrick and Nick Heffaker were right there in the woods watching us. I mean, very visible area. They were in the woods, but you could see them. They were making their presence known. I spoke to them. I went in there and I spoke to Nick and to Colby and asked them where Molly was. And I just basically told Colby, I said, just help us, just tell us where she's at. And he told me he did not know, hadn't seen her. And so we spent probably, I don't know, an hour and a half in that location. I finally told the people that I had been searching with, guys, we need to go on. We need to continue. And so we were leaving that area. And when we came back out of the fence, over to my left, or to the gate, I'm sorry, just below the shop building down the hill, to my left, behind the travel trailer, there's a fence. There was a freezer that was chained. It was a chest type freezer, and it had chain all the way around it, and it was chained to the fence. And
just in the middle there, just out in the open.
Just out in the open, chained to a fence. Just to my left, hindsight's 2020, and I didn't know about the freezer at this time. I had not been told about this freezer, or there had not been a big enough deal made about this freezer that it clicked in my head. But that man that lived in the travel trailer was on a horse beside the freezer with a rifle on his, the butt of the rifle up on his leg. And I'm thinking in my mind, I'm thinking, watching the property, making sure I don't know what I was going through my mind, but what caught my eye was a Love County deputy sitting there. And this is how naive I was at that moment, at this time, about the players involved here, including the people in law enforcement. The man sitting in the car had white hair and a white beard, and I thought it was Joe Russell. So I drove up to the car, and I asked him what the hell he was doing there. You were not invited. And he said, I was invited by the Nip family. They want us out here watching, make sure there's no problems. I said something else. I don't even recall what it was, and I drove off. Well, come to find out, that wasn't even Joe Russell. That was one of his deputies. That's how little I knew about these people back then. The freezer, it's just like, after everything we've heard since about the freezer, about it being taken out there by Rob Branch, about Molly being put in it for some time. I don't believe Colt was in that freezer because I think he was still laying out there in the woods. But I believe Molly was in that freezer at that moment. And one time there was a girl who I got a message years ago where a girl said that she was sitting on a freezer or an ice chest, she called it. Could have been a freezer, I'm not sure. But she was sitting on it. She was out there. She was a druggie at the time and all of this. And Con told her to get off the freezer. Molly Miller's in there, or Molly's in, or something like that. And she thought it was a joke.
When was this? When did you hear the story?
That story was like back in 2014. I mean, early on, but
and how was it told to you? How did you hear about that story? The big thing we have to do with this case is we have to verify all these stories and tips and rumors because they're coming at us at a pretty alarming pace here. And a lot of them line up with what you're saying. But there's also some outliers that we have to rule out in order to kind of narrow what the story is. So if you can kind of validate or attribute who and when you heard that story.
Well, that would be, we had a discussion about the messages that all of the thousands of messages that I got through Facebook over the course of 5-6 years. There's thousands of them, and that I've downloaded from Facebook. I've obtained them all through Facebook. And so that's something that we would have to go through and piece by piece and read every tip that I got.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, at least you lose it. We'll have to do that.
We'll do that. Okay. So this tip came in, like, again, early days, 2014. Is that when you heard this tip?
It was probably 2014. It wasn't any later than that. It may have even still been in 2013 that I got that tip. When tips are coming in like that and you're so overwhelmed, and I'm not an investigator. I'm trying to determine what do I need to set aside for now and what really is something right now that I need to focus on. But I kept every tip. And that way, like now, every time I talk about anything in this case, memories come up. I remember hearing such and such, and this type of thing. There's a lot of people out there who have given information that while in the midst of it all, I'm just trying to take the information and move on. And take the information and move on. And then I'm thinking in my head, I can compile this all one day if it goes on that long. And it has.
Yeah.
So here we are.
Well, let's be clear. When this first happened, your family was dealing with this emotionally. It was an emotional void. It was a loss for you guys. So you didn't, and you're, like you said, you're not an investigator. You're not a police officer. You're not professionally trained to look at this objectively. It's only now, so many years later, and all the experiences that you've had going through this whole process where you've actually become an investigator. So now you can look at it more objectively. And that's why, when we met you doing the documentary, we realized that. And that's why we wanted to help you to do this, to help guide you through this process. And you've done an amazing job, Paula.
It's incredible.
And when I talk to other investigators, professional retirement and retired people, law enforcement, and I tell them what you've done so far, they go, well, unfortunately, that's what needs to be done because they're not doing it. And God bless her for keeping the fan to the fire and investigating this, because obviously everyone else's hands are tied. They're not going to do anything until you give them something that's valuable that they can kind of put in their case file to build a case so they can get a conviction or an arrest, because that's what they're looking for. Otherwise, it's not useful to them.
Right.
So at that time, you didn't really know about the freezer.
No.
So it probably wouldn't even have registered that was something to follow through with.
No, it's one of those, that can't be possible. In my brain, it's like, really? Did they really do that? Because I'm not really understanding the lengths that these people go through and what type of people they actually are. And the backwoodsiness of all of this and what I've learned about these people and their operations down there and how it's all so intertwined with keeping that sheriff in office, Joe Russell, that's going to keep this.
To keep the criminal enterprise going.
The criminal enterprise,
it was a criminal enterprise.
It's going to keep going, keep rolling in the money as long as we can keep this sheriff in. We're golden. But it wasn't all clicking till probably 2015, maybe later 2014. All of this is starting to add up, and it's like, wow, there's a lot of corruption going on here, and it's going way above this sheriff. But that is just...
I think most people, when a tragedy happens to them, they look to law enforcement as a guide to help them through this process and to investigate. And we all think, all right, they're going to do their job. We trust law enforcement, but not all law enforcement is trustworthy. Some of them aren't. We have lots of friends in law enforcement, and a lot of them are trustworthy, but there's bad apples. And Joe created this environment where he could do he was a king of the castle. Sheriffs generally, because they're elected officials, they control the jails. They're very powerful people. They're not like a chief of police who has to answer to a city attorney and a mayor. Joe, right. He controls everything. And so he created this whole environment with his family members to deal drugs. He was convicted of that. He was convicted of transporting methamphetamine. So it was crazy. It was like the perfect storm. And they were in this little part of Oklahoma, southeastern Oklahoma, where everyone really didn't care what happened.
Right. I was listening to the podcast, Misty's podcast, where she was talking about us going down the day that we went to Con Nip's house and had that conversation with Con. And see, the day after that happened, the day after that, then Con called, I believe it was Con that called Molly's Uncle Michael and wanted to meet. It was Kobe Barrett. I think it was Kobe, Con's uncle, that called Molly's uncle saying that he needed to talk to him. meet him at the corner of Pike and Oswalt Road, I guess. And then see if y'all get to talk to Michael. This is something that he could clarify for you. So Michael and Molly's grandpa, Alex, and a friend of Michael's, they all drove down there. Alex took a separate vehicle. So they all drove down there. When they got to the corner of Oswalt and Pike, Jennifer Knipp, Con's aunt, Jennifer, was the only one there. But Michael could hear a four-wheeler in the distance in like the wooded area. Now, what transpired there, I know an argument ensued between Michael and Jennifer. And Michael and them, Colby didn't show up. Michael can fill you in more on that story, actually what transpired. But point to all this is they left to head back to Wilson, Molly's uncle and grandpa and such, and they were leaving to go back. And Michael got a phone call from Con and said, my grandpa wants to talk to Alex. Michael stopped. He got out and told Alex. Alex told Michael, you just go on home. I'll go talk to John. It'll be fine. And so Alex drove on down there himself. And when he arrived at people pointing guns at him when he got there.
Who was pointing guns at him? Did he say who?
Huh?
Did he say who was pointing guns at him?
Johnny, Con's dad, and from my understanding, it was Con's dad and Con's grandpa. And I know one of John Knipp's brothers, it was either there and was pointing a gun at Alex or showed up while Alex was standing there. But Alex ripped off his shirt and put his hands in the air and said, I am unarmed. John Knipp says to Alex, get off my property, Alex. And Alex said, I was told you wanted to talk to me. John said, I have nothing to say to you. And then Alex says, where's my granddaughter? And John tells him to get off the property. The police show up. They all come rolling in there.
Love County?
And yeah, it was all so weird. I mean, who called the police?
Well, it sounds like it was orchestrated.
It was orchestrated, but by who and what did they hope to accomplish by this?
They were baiting Alex.
Absolutely. They wanted to arrest him for something. They
were hoping Alex was going to come guns a-blazing to confront them.
Yeah.
And then they were to be justified. This guy came on our property with a gun. And
we shot him.
Well, Alex had weapons in the truck. I think he had 2 guns, but they were in the truck. And he left there. I think he was already back in the truck driving when the police come rolling in. They stopped him. They actually confiscated his guns or a gun. They took it. They did and Alex he had flyers of Molly in the seat beside him and hands it to the deputy and says, where's my granddaughter? They ended up letting Alex go on. And I mean, they couldn't arrest him for anything. He'd done nothing wrong. But I got a call telling me what was going on. And I called David Seals, who was the OSBI agent at the time. I told him, if you don't do something, somebody's going to end up dead. You have got to do something. And he called a meeting that happened, I believe, September 1st, because it was Labor Day weekend. And so David Seals called a meeting with all the law enforcement agencies that were involved. So it would have been Carter County, Lone Grove, Wilson PD, Love County. And we invited the Oklahoma Highway Patrol to be present. Although they were not involved, they sent, somebody in my family knew somebody at the Oklahoma Highway Patrol. They contacted him, spoke to him. They sent Ronnie Hampton, who was the chief or the captain of Troop F in Ardmore at the time. So he showed up. And so I was the spokesperson for our family. And there was about 30 family members there between Colt Haynes' family and our family. There was probably 30 people. And each agency, they went down the line and each agency discussed what they were doing on the case and what they had done. And then we could ask each agency questions. So I would ask, questions of each agency, and then we get to Joe Russell. You know what? What I remember about even looking, so when he's talking, it's like he's so monotone that he's what the word I'm looking for. But I was seeing blood. I was so angry at the way he was putting it out there. It was almost like it was all our fault that she was missing, and that type of thing. And when I finally got to question him, the only thing I even remember saying to the man is this. I said, Molly's blood is on your hands. And that is because you have allowed the people in this family to do whatever they want without any consequences. I mean, because of you, that Molly's dead. And at that point, OSBI told me that that was a very serious allegation that I was making against an elected official. And I said, well, it's the damn truth. Had he not done his job, Molly would be here today. And then he made me leave the meeting and took me out to his office. And thankfully, we had somebody there legally that could guide us. And she sat outside the office because he would not let her come in while he was talking to me. But she was listening outside the office.
And who were you talking to?
He started saying,
was it David Seals or?
It was David Seals.
And he wouldn't let your attorney be in there while he was talking to you?
Mm-mm. No, he told her she needed to sit outside. He kept giving me a piece of paper and telling me to fill out a form. And she finally came in there and she said, stop. Don't say another word. And I said, well, I guess I'm not talking anymore. But he wouldn't let me go back into the meeting.
What kind of form was he getting you to sign?
I don't even recall. A statement form, I believe it was. He was wanting me to fill out some kind of statement form or something. She's like, no, you need to stop. You're done. Thankfully, she was there, and it could have went a lot further than it did. But
how long after that meeting was Joe Russell ousted and arrested from the sheriff?
That meeting was September the 10th, 2013.
Oh, 2013. Okay.
Yes, and he was arrested in 2016. Now, something else. On that very day, September 10th, 2013, one of my friends, a lady that I've become very close to in Love County, she had been out just looking around in the location where we know the car went through and that type of thing. She found she found a fire that was happening in the ravine that you guys were in the documentary with Philip Klein.
Mm-hmm.
She called her family, who was a fireman, to come down there and look at it. Joe Russell showed up and some others in law enforcement. Joe wouldn't even go down into the ravine where this fire was. But he said to the fireman, he said, hey, you think this fire is hot enough to burn a body? And this fireman was like, basically, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. It was on the very day that we're having that meeting, about 9 days after we were at Con. My theory has always been that they were burning evidence in that ravine. The ashes were knee-deep in that ravine from all the garbage and stuff. Talked to the landowner. The landowner didn't start the fire. 2 weeks later, I went to that location to check it for myself, and that's when we actually noticed the hole. And I asked her, I said, did you notice this hole the first time you were here? And she said no. So we looked back at pictures from the day she found it to present when I'm there. The day she found it, that hole that we found was covered up with a piece of tin, and then there was limbs on top of that. And when the day I'm there and we see the hole, it's just plain there, the tin was laid off to the side, and I bent down and put my hand in there, and it was hot. I mean, like, if you put your hand over a grill, when it's burning, it's that kind of hot. My cousin Misty walked over there. She put her hand in there and accidentally touched the side of it with her hand, and it caused a blister. It was so hot. There was charcoal briquette down in the bottom of that hole. Like, they were keeping that fire going for a reason. Somehow the theory is that something exploded to cause it to the fire to spread the way it did. It didn't go far, but it did spread away from the general location where it was supposed to be. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and that is the same burn pit a year later when the cadaver dogs with Trace Sargent came in, and that's where it hit for human remains scent, correct?
Yes. Okay. So, exact same spot.
Next time on Partners in True Crime.
And Joe Russell said, Paula, we've already checked this. I said, well, you didn't check it well enough. This is a long, hard road we've been living. It's a depressing road.
If you or anyone you know is suffering from a methamphetamine addiction, please contact the American Meth Addiction Hotline.
If you or anyone you know has been the victim of sexual abuse, please contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline.
For any tips relating to the disappearance of Molly Miller and Colt Haynes, please contact 833-4-MOLLY and Colt, and they will be directed to the proper law enforcement agency.
All rights reserved. This has been a production of 722 Media Content. Please visit our website where you can subscribe to the podcast, find show notes, and listen to Vi's original song, Take Me Back, written for Molly Miller.